After finishing things up on my Fireball Frostwall Sork, I decided to experiment with Archmage, and oh my god is it broken. But one thing I noticed after initially swapping over is I was very, very squishy. So I'm going to talk about a setup that I found, which makes Archmage much, much tankier. Unfortunately, there is a pretty strict gearing requirement here, so you might not be able to do it on a budget, but once you get the currency, this is definitely a highly effective combo. I also found that Archmage isn't what I thought it was going to be at all. It's huge amounts of damage even when you're not optimizing for it, and your mana issues aren't really mana issues, because as it turns out, you get so much mana that gives you so much mana regen, at least as a Stormweaver, that Archmage itself kind of fixes your mana problems on top of providing damage, which means there's a decent chance that it's going to get nerfed at some point in the future. So if you want to keep up with Path of Exile news and mechanical interactions plus what they mean, do be sure to get subscribed and, hey, maybe ring that notification bell to see all future uploads. So first up, Archmage gives you 8%, or I guess 9% if you get a level 21, of damage as extra lightning. So I'm using Fireball and Frostwall, a fire and a cold skill. This works totally fine, because my Archmage is adding so much of my damage that I'm really just doing lightning damage and playing a lightning build that happens to have fire and cold tagged skills. So +1 to level of lightning skill gems won't affect my Fireball, but increases to lightning damage will, since most of the damage it does is lightning. But Archmage scales off of your maximum mana, so you need a lot of max mana if you want to maximize your damage bonus. And one thing that's very good for scaling your mana is Eldritch Battery. This converts energy shield into mana. So for example, these ES gloves give 280 energy shield. With Eldritch Battery, instead of contributing to my character's defenses, this gives me 280 maximum mana. Where this helmet that has energy shield and mana on it, 343 ES, 135 mana, that is 478 mana. This is how, on an Archmage build, you can get a much larger mana pool. But this is where a big downside comes in. Because if you do this, all of your energy shield, a defensive stat that normally extends your health pool, is gone. It's going into mana, and therefore damage. So yes, you are fueling Archmage, you are destroying enemies, but you're going to be way squishier than, say, what you had before. In my specific example, before I converted over to Archmage, I had about 10,000 energy shield. This meant that I could tank most hits in the game, including a lot of boss slams. But swapping over to Archmage, that all went away. And I'd either need to get maximum life on gear, i.e. giving up energy shield and mana prefixes, or potentially be very squishy and maybe go mind over matter, where damage is taken from mana before life. So now my mana pool is scaling my damage, and it's definitely a lot bigger than my life pool is going to be, but the thing that I'm using to fuel my spells is also now going to constantly be eaten away whenever I take damage. In other words, if you just go Archmage, you take Eldritch Battery to get a whole bunch of mana for damage, and you just take Mind Over Matter, you'll end up in situations where you take a bunch of hits, maybe you stand in a big boss slam, your mana gets eaten away, you can't cast your spells, so you can't kill the enemies, thus stopping them from doing damage to you, and you end up dead. But there is a really interesting quirk of the way gearing and conversion works in Path of Exile 2 that allows you to get a whole bunch of energy shield and a whole bunch of defenses while still scaling Archmage. And the next step for this is the Everlasting Gaze, an amulet that gives you 20 to 30% of your maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield. Now, because gain as extra is not converted, this does not create an infinite ES to mana to ES to mana to ES to mana loop. So you get a bunch of mana in ES on gear. And after that, all the stats get converted straight into mana. Well, I guess the mana doesn't get converted because it's already mana, but that's fine. You end up with a large base mana pool, which then provides extra maximum energy shield. This is unaffected by the conversion because it's counted as gain as extra, which cannot be converted. This also means the more mana you have, the more ES you get. So I currently have 4,912 mana. This is the base mana that I have, counting everything from my ES gear getting converted over, and then all the increases to maximum mana that I have from my gear and the trait. But I have 6,255 energy shield. This is because I also have increases from the tree to maximum energy shield. So even though the base value for my mana is much, much lower, the end result is much, much higher. And the more I scale my damage, the more I scale my defenses, the more I scale my defenses, the more I scale my damage. Though there are a few other steps to this combo, which I'm going to get into next. And that is where increases come in, because you can click nodes on your tree that say increase maximum mana and increase maximum energy shield. Now, if you click increase maximum energy shield, this is not applied to your ES before it is converted into mana. Instead, it's converted into mana, all of your ES goes away, then the base number of your mana is gained as extra ES, and after that, the percent increase to maximum mana is applied to your mana pool, scaling it up, in my case, to 4840, and the increase is applied to whatever number you got from your base mana pool, is then scaled up by all of your increases, resulting in a total. So when it comes to energy shield getting converted into mana via Eldritch Battery, increases do not apply. This is stated directly on the stat conversion tooltip. For example, if you convert your energy shield into mana, the converted portion would be scaled by percentage modifiers to mana. The percentage modifiers to energy shield would have no effect. Thus, the percentage energy shield modifiers have no effect before energy shield is converted into mana. What about the reverse? When the mana is gained as extra maximum energy shield, wouldn't that be affected by all the increases? Because after all, Everlasting Gaze says gain 30% of maximum mana, but the gain tooltip says gaining a percentage of stat A as stat B is calculated from the base value of stat A. This isn't actually 30% of maximum mana, this is 30% of base maximum mana before any increases. The portion gained scales with percentage modifiers to stat B, not percentage modifiers to stat A. So, once you gain maximum energy shield based on your base mana, after all of the plus mana from your gear and after all of the conversion, but before increased maximum mana stat, your base energy shield is then scaled by all of your increased maximum energy shield, such as from the nodes on the tree, or if you had a fun jewel that said like percent increased energy shield from small passive nodes. The word maximum mana vary is a little confusing, and hopefully there's a better term for it in the future, but I think ultimately it is for the best because it makes the stats a lot easier to understand. No matter how much you are converting or gaining as extra, mana scales off of mana, energy shield scales off of energy shield, and never will the two mix except when you do weird shenanigans like this. Assuming this doesn't get nerfed out of the game anyway. But defensively, there are ways to make this even better. The first is by taking Chaos Inoculation. This renders you completely immune to chaos damage, so you don't need chaos resistance on any of your gear. This is good because it frees up suffixes for things like intelligence or elemental resistances that might otherwise make your gear a little bit easier. So, being immune to chaos damage lets you completely ignore map mods like damage is extra chaos, lets you completely ignore poison, and also lets you completely ignore bleed, because bleed, interestingly enough, is only applied to your character when you take health damage. So, if you have 1 health and you take health damage, you are going to die. Thus, bleed is not a problem, and you can effectively ignore it. Poison normally bypasses energy shield. Well, you are immune to chaos damage, so it still bypasses your energy shield and does nothing because you're immune. You're basically just a witcher. You're immune to plagues. And then, you also don't have to deal with the fact that chaos damage normally does double damage to energy shield. That's not a problem because it does no damage to you because you're immune. Now here's where things get really, really awesome. Because as a Stormweaver, you get a ton of mana regeneration through Force of Will. 1% increased effect of Arcane Surge per 15 maximum mana. So at 4,912 maximum mana, I get 327% increased effective Arcane Surge. Arcane Surge grants 20% more mana regeneration rate. So 0.2 times 4.27, or about 85% increased mana regeneration rate, which is absolutely bonkers. This makes sustaining the mana costs for Archmage trivial. But it also means you can use Mind Over Matter. Remember the thing that I said at the very start of a video, where if you're using Mind Over Matter, your mana pool, which is your damage and your skill cost, is also your main defensive layer? Well, you can use it, but it has a really interesting interaction if you're already CI at Eldritch Battery. Or I guess if you're already CI, because Eldritch Battery at this point is just allowing you to scale both your mana pool and your energy shield pool off of the same stats on your items. See, the order of operations is first, damage goes to your energy shield because energy shield protects your life. This also means if you have the Grim Feast aura, the overshield will be blown away by damage before your actual ES pool moves. This also means you have time after taking damage for your energy shield recharge to work. If you get hit once, and then you stop taking damage, your recharge will start kicking in, and you're going to be able to fix that pretty darn quickly. Then, second of all, Mind Over Matter says damage is taken from mana before life. So once your entire ES pool is gone, it will look like your character has died. But you don't actually die until your entire mana pool is also depleted, because all damage is taken from mana before life. This means even though you have 1 health, even though you have a big old empty ES bar, it's very scary. I've felt like, oh god, I just got hit by that and I died a couple times now. I'm sure it's going to happen again. You're not dead until the blue bar on the right is completely empty. And because this is more of a backup defense, more of something that you don't necessarily use first and foremost, you don't have to worry as much about the mana drain. Yes, if you take an astronomical amount of damage, your recovery, your defenses are completely overwhelmed, you will still die, but you won't consistently run into a situation where you take a hit as you're casting a spell, therefore running out of mana. It also means you can use a mana flask as a pseudo life flask and heal yourself up by providing more mana to that pool. It also means mana on kill is really powerful. I would recommend with a setup like this running mana on kill on every single jewel, because then as you kill enemies, you get a big chunk of that massive mana pool back, effectively erasing damage that you took, even if your ES is 0. Even from the start, I like the idea of going Archmage. It provides a lot of damage, but my concern was the defenses and the mana sustain. Turns out the mana sustain concern was not a concern at all, at least on Stormweaver, because the bigger your mana pool, the better your mana automatically sustains, so Archmage is in and of itself a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then, in terms of the damage and defenses, well, damage is fine, so I thought maybe I go a full ES build and then just get a little mana and do Archmage, but then I'm doing like half fire or half cold and half lightning damage, and that's really hard to get exposure for, and then enemy resistances are a pain. And so I do think the all-in approach is much better. And to be clear, this is really gear intensive. You need the Everlasting Gaze before you can even consider a setup like this. And beyond that, you need really good items so that you have enough energy shield to build up a good mana pool, to then build up a good energy shield pool through the Everlasting Gaze. So this is far from, oh, it's just easy. It's not easy, but it is very powerful. The damage difference is absolutely unreal. Before the build could clear tier 15s, now I am not even reading mods on tier 15s, because even if enemies get like increased maximum life, Elirez, I still just full shock them through that and obliterate them in seconds. Now with that said, because Archmage is so strong, and because you can use it to scale both your damage and your defenses, which then scales your damage, which then scales your defenses, it's entirely possible that it's going to get nerfed or adjusted in the future. I don't know what form that's going to take. I don't know if that means this entire setup won't work, or if it's going to be really good still, just not quite as good as it is now. So, again, if you want to know my thoughts after that does happen, do be sure to get subscribed, and hey, you made it to the end, so why not leave a like while you're down there. Also, if you want to know more about my character and how I built it, I will be making a build update video sometime in the near future. I just want to tinker around with my gear and test some stuff more, because I don't feel like I've fully optimized this Archmage setup yet. Then again, there's a decent chance that I won't feel like I've fully optimized it even after I'm done tinkering, but I will reach a point where I'm happy with it. Also, big shout out to Void241, another member of Maxroll, who I was talking to and theorycrafting with, and he helped me with some of the finer points of his build. He told me about the Against the Darkness, which at the time not only gave max mana, but helped me to cap my cold res, which was really helpful. He plays a lot of Torchlight Infinite and Path of Exile. He's a super smart theory crafter, and you should absolutely check him out. Also, if you're looking for something else to watch, then maybe check out how my build was before I added the Archmage. Last up, if you've been playing Archmage as well, I'm very curious about some of your experiences, so do be sure to share them down in the comments below. For now, I'm going to get going. Thanks for watching to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.